your day going?
Very, very good. I have a free Sunday out in the woods and doing some exercises, doing some writing, being with my wife. Just great day.
Is that a rare occurrence for you to have a free day off?
Well, I had one appointment, this one with you. But other than that, yeah, it's rather a rare occurrence. Big family and many interests and huge crowd of good friends. It's beautiful.
Awesome. Perhaps we could start, and like I said, it's very relaxed. For me, it's just a matter of connecting with people who are on the cutting edge of awareness or exploring consciousness and practicing awareness, and just sharing that conversation with people.
Beautiful.
And hopefully presenting your perspective to new people, right? So just trying to connect all these pieces together.
I like that. I really like what you're doing. I only had little time to look into it, but I like the project, and you seem to really have a network of amazing views put together already. Yeah.
The wonder of diversity. You know, I love to explore the diversity of human beings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Through conversation, in this case. Through conversation, in this case. So maybe, can you just describe what you do?
I'm mainly working with people since 35 something years. I started out as a body psychotherapist, or body worker rather. I worked directly on the body first, and then I'm body psychotherapist, and then I always found something that was missing in what I knew, so I kept learning and became a full-fledged psychotherapist, and then learned a couple of approaches there, and learned some coaching and learned couple therapy. So mainly I work directly with people, either in person or via Skype. And it's psychotherapy, couple therapy, coaching, developmental coaching, executive coaching, whatever, or integral human design.
Just out of curiosity, do you know what drives you to do this?
Love for humanity. Trying to make a contribution.
You must be a very self-examining person as well. What kind of drives you to?
Well, it's a lifelong journey in a way. I had some early situations in my life where I had this incident of seeing that, like, my parents don't see me the way I experience myself, like this breaking up of this one coherent reality in my awareness, and I had some satori like that made me see the world differently. So that triggered my own journey, and I tried to find my way into more conventional kind of work. Like, I studied biochemistry for a while, for like 4 years or so, and I tried to study ecology, which was at that time completely unknown, and create my own self-knitted study. That was the only way to go about that at that time. And it didn't work out to really answer my need for growth and for understanding how life works. I was always curious how life works. And at university, finally, I arrived at theoretical chemistry, and they basically said they don't know. And the only way they work is to create models of the world that are basically determined by how computers work. That's when I left the studies. That's when I left university. I said, okay, that's not where I want to go. So I went into more direct studies of people. I have a good friend. I said, you read so much more than I said to her, and she said, you read people. Not reading in terms of doing a reading with them, which I don't like because of the lack of dialogue. But in terms of, I have so many people in my life that I work with and that I live with, and I learn from each one of them. And each one of them is a way to expand my own capacity for love and for understanding and for going deeper into the miracle of life.
So what were the trigger points of information that kind of set you off in new directions? I guess human design was one of those, wasn't it, for you?
Human design was 1989, so that was rather late in my... I was a psychotherapist already for 12 years or so. I started very young. So that was more something that came across my way, and I thought I had some experience as a psychotherapist by then that some things with some people couldn't be worked with easily. So this notion of maybe there is something in people that is immutable, that cannot change, was kind of interesting to me. So I never encountered the human design system as something where I had a question. So I was encountering it with my question as a professional. I thought, okay, if we can tick some stuff off and just say, look, just live with it. We don't do therapy about that. Save your money, save your time. It will not change. Yeah? That would give relief to some clients. Yeah? So that's how I came into that. And then over time, it's a complicated system, as you probably found out. So it took some time to learn it, and I learned all of it. So I became a teacher, and teaching it, I realized it's incomplete. It has so many flaws and unquestioned assumptions in it, and basically it's only good for a small fraction of people at a certain point of their journey. So I became very critical of it and questioning everything in it, and found a lot of things to discuss.
Can you get into that, where you find that it's limited?
Well, that's big. It's the main point is the lack of a developmental understanding of human beings altogether. If you give somebody a map and tell them this is who you are, or at least this is what comes across for most people, this is how people take it, you enhance a kind of fixation on something that is not their self in the first place.
Mm.
So basically you treat people, when you say you're initially programmed, you're just running off a program. It's like telling a person you have a brain of a worm or a snail, yeah? Because these creatures work that way. They have a program and they live that out, and then they die. And then there are species like birds who have a brain that is initially programmed, that is running on a program, and then has a short phase at the beginning of life where there's an initial programming possible to adapt to the life circumstances. We are a completely different species. We have some program that we bring with us, and maybe the human design system has an insight into a very small fraction of that program. And I can go into that if you want. And then we have this phase of programming where we are initially programmed in life, especially the first 7 years, where our brain just works in delta and theta waves, and we're basically in a hypnotic trance and just process things like a sponge, taking in all the behaviors of people, and that's our initial programming. But then eventually when the beta waves and the alpha waves in the brain develop from 7 years, and from 12 years on, we have this kind of possibility to look at ourselves. We have the beginnings of self-reflected consciousness. From then on, at the latest, we are program opening beings. We have the capacity to rewrite whatever is in there in our system, and then it depends on the light of which values and why and for why. Yeah? So, but to give people a map and say this is who you are and this is your imprint and this is basically all you need to understand yourself is very debilitating in my understanding.
So that capacity for self-reflection. Oh, you froze again. Can you hear me?
Yes, I did. I do.
Yeah. Okay. So that capacity for self-reflection, would you say that's a small fraction of the whole, or would you say, what's your experience in dealing with people?
That's very dependent on their development. That's why, for instance, I combined the human design system with the integral approach, because there you have this notion of states of consciousness and stages of consciousness. And stages of consciousness is like a ladder model, although I don't like the ladder model so much because it implies something higher. It's an arc that we move through, and in the beginning we have a rather smaller range of consciousness. This is me and my survival and my world, and then the further we get on that arc, the bigger the range of our consciousness becomes. And depending where a person is, people always make meaning of whatever you give to them from their stage of development, from their style of meaning making, from their worldview. So if you give a person a human design chart who is in a rather early stage of development, where it's me against the world, they will use it just as an excuse for any behavior they have that is for their own benefit. Yeah? If you and that's the issue. Yeah? 80% of the population is in the so-called conventional phases of development, stages of development, where self-reflection is not the name of the game. It takes a while during life until you reach this point where you question things, and question the systems that you're taught, question the program that you have been given, question the human design system. Only 20% have a working of their inner mind that makes this possible in depth. For the 80%, they're good customers. You tell them, this is who you are, and they say, thank you for the information, I'm going to do something with it. Depending on how they, what is in the foreground. Yeah? Human beings can only see as far as they can see in their current level of development. And in the beginning, it's self-centeredness, and then it's confirming with group norms, and then it's trying to be special, and then it's subordinating higher values to the achievement of self-determined goals. So in this area, people like the human design system, especially when they're in the socialized mind, when they try to conform, when they have all this experience of conditioning and not knowing who they are. Yeah? And when then somebody from the next stage, the expert, the skill-centric person that tries to be special, comes and gives them information how to come out of the conditioning, they believe it. And they don't see it's a reconditioning program that writes another program on top of the programs they had been given as a child.
Sorry, you froze again there.
How far could you hear me?
Just up to maybe the last sentence.
Okay.
So it looks better now. So
I think it was saying something like, especially for people in the so-called socialized mind, that's a Robert Keegan term when it's just 3 stages. Yeah? Socialized mind is where you want to be part of the group and conform to the group norms, and you subordinate your own needs to the needs and to the goals of the group. This is where a lot of people operate. So when you give such a person a human design chart and say, this is going to help you to decondition, they're happy with the chance. And then, but they believe the person in the next stage, they believe the expert, like Raoul Hu. Yeah? They say, okay, this guy is the expert, he knows something about that, he's going to tell me who I am. And then they conform to these new norms in the new group, and they don't realize that they're repeating a pattern and not really making a move in their developmental curve.
Right. And that's why you see yourself as a nurse in a rescue clinic.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Because people find us on the internet and then they ask us all sorts of things that basically show how much they have been reconditioned with human design knowledge, with human design lingo and beliefs. And
is that not inevitable from anything that comes through this information that comes through the voice into some and filtered through their mind and their ears, that there's that tendency to always condition? I mean, I'm not saying that it's inevitable, but it seems like it's something that every person must deal with until they've recognized the separation of mind from awareness.
I didn't really understand what you're pointing towards.
Well, the one thing that I find that with this project, right, we're having a conversation. So I guess in human design terms, our outer authorities are having an interaction to some
Okay.
degree. So people who are hearing it, okay, so people are hearing our interaction. They're filtering these words through their minds.
Yes.
Generally, until people have come to the understanding of their I guess their type of their authority using HD terms, it's filtered through the mind, and so the mind always wants to hold on to information as being a structure to build around. Is that something you wrestle with as a therapist? Is that how do you reach into their bodies through their minds? Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah. That was a lot now. Um, First of all, I don't use the concept of authority anymore in the way the human design system used it, because it's a strong reduction. There's a good point in this idea of authority to include the body in the decision-making process. But then you assign a certain authority to the person, which is only a small aspect of their whole being. So again, it's a deep limitation. We're at our best if we make decisions with all our 9 centers, if you look at the body graph. Yeah, and the mind is part of it. It's just, for people who have been only in the mind, that's a smart move, to start being aware of their body, which again is something that as an overall state you have ongoingly only in later stages of development. So the other thing was about how do you address that? Yeah, in my experience, the people who come through human design as a human design system, I have to differentiate them. People who come through the human design system, they're usually more in their mind than the average population. They hear about aspects of their physicality and of their form body, but they're not embodying it. So they process like an information of a splenic authority through their mind, and then they go back and project it back in here. And that's also a reason why this information often, in my experience, separates people more from their potential than it helps them. For some people, for some periods of time, it's helpful. But the embodiment and also the process of embodiment is something where you go from a more limited, contracted version of yourself into a more expanded version of yourself. To bring people into their body, to invite people to be more embodied, not only in terms of just having awareness of their body, but also this process of embodiment where you go from a more contracted version of yourself to a more expanded and connected version of yourself. When I work with people, I support this by being a whole person myself when working with them, being aware of my own body, and that changes something. People often say to me, "You breathe so much," and I say, it's normal to me. I'm just breathing. But they notice that I'm breathing, and then I'm reminded of their own breathing. And it's just mirror neurons and stuff happening between the two of us. And the other thing is that I constantly observe the person as a whole. So I'm working with their facial expression, I'm working with their posture, I'm working with their breathing pattern, I might work with their body indirectly or by movement or directly by touching them with their permission, of course. That's the benefit of coming from a body psychotherapy approach. Does this answer your question?
Yes. Actually, that was what I was going to ask you. Is like when someone walks into your office, what's the how do you make your assessment of that person? And you just kind of answered that. I mean, is there a standard? Is there a standard ailment for humanity?
No. Very good question. No? I like the question. I don't think so. Yeah. Because we have to move through these stages. And at every stage you have different issues. Yep. Like for the example of before, if somebody is group-centric and not feeling themselves because they're always out there and trying to find out what the other person needs and please their needs before they even feel their own needs, for such a person, just the idea of, oh, you can feel in your own body, just this input of, here is a map of your inside. Yeah? It's not an accurate map, but just the notion of, oh, I could look at myself, yeah, can be of great benefit. But that's only in this phase. Yeah? And the important thing, from my view, when it comes to the body graph, is that the body graph of a human design evaluation is only a very, very small fraction of what is relevant to understand this human being. Yeah? You wouldn't be happy with a map of New York if it's only a block of Chinatown. But that's what the body graph is. Yeah? It's a tiny aspect. If you look at the wheel of the 64 hexagrams, you probably know it's then differentiated in lines and colors and tones and bases. So altogether in this wheel there are 69,120 possible activations. Out of these, this imprint that is displayed in the body graph, it takes out 26 of those, which is 0.04% or something. Yeah? This corresponds maybe to what in genetics they call the genetic markers. The genetic markers is what genetically makes a person different. In genetics, this is less than 0.1% of the whole code. So, just from genetic perspective, if we want to play with this analogy, what you see in a human design body graph is less than 0.1% of the genetic imprint. The body graph as a whole, the wheel of the 64 hexagrams as archetypal themes, is 99% of who you are as a human being, and is all relevant. And then there's this tiny fraction where the gods or whoever highlight something, say this, but it's not yourself. It's a small fraction of something. Yeah? Nobody knows. Ra didn't know, in my understanding. I have my assumptions what it could be, but
what are those?
We're not there.
What are your assumptions of what they could be?
Well, it's like the whole system. Why we still use it is because it is something that people resonate with. These 26 points, and when you put it together into a whole picture. And with Richard Rudd's Golden Path, yeah, these sequences, people resonate with that. One reason is because whatever you take, you resonate with it because it's part of your human nature. Yeah? And there are these situations where people have a wrong birth information and they get a wrong chart, and they live with it and work with it and study it, and they say, I feel so seen.
Let's just take it a bit of a direction here. And do you see an overall purpose for all these individuated stories? What's the overall story for these that encompasses all these individual stories?
In my view, it's all stories that change form in a process of all of us trying to come back home. Yeah, we start a journey in unconscious unity, if you want, and then we go through some conventional stages where we build our differentiation, and then when we have enough differentiation, we start to deconstruct it. And in each of these stages, the stories change, and there's a pattern. Yeah, that's well researched by Susanne Krug-Kreider, for instance, who has this ego developmental theory where you see that the use of language corresponds to these stages, and there's a sequence that's all over the planet the same. So there are different versions of the same story. Like, let's use the example from before. Yeah, if somebody is in a socialized mind, they have stories about belonging of some kind that are relevant to them, and they have issues around that. Yeah, and when they leave that phase in life, these stories become irrelevant, and they have new stories. Then they are in the expert mode, and they acquire knowledge, and they become somebody special and important who has something to say in their own field. And that, yeah. And when they have that, they realize there isn't only one way to do things. There might be two, and we can optimize by choosing which one, and so on. Yeah? And only then people start to really look inside and to question who they are and what the world is. And then there's this pluralist phase, and and it goes on and on and on until we reach that point of, oh, it's all a story. And we can be aware of the construction of the story. And then we come back into simplicity, and we come back into seeing the workings of our own mind, trying to tell a story that gives us a coherent self-experience and eventually make sense of what's going on. Yeah? And once you have the courage to look through that as well and be completely in the awareness of the construct in every moment, you come back home, this time in a conscious union. So first, in the beginning, you're individuated in terms you come into this form body, and suddenly you have a boundary of skin around you, and the consciousness doesn't know what to do. Yeah? And go through all these decades of changing the story until you end up in a place where the story drops away. And that's when you reach awakened awareness. And that's not something you reach once and then you're there forever. It's like, yeah, all these stages are fluctuating. Yeah? We need all these stages to function in the world. So even if you are further along the line, further along the arc, it doesn't mean that any of the ones before become irrelevant. On the contrary, in order to be an integrated human being, each one of these is important.
So when you take that knowledge out and look at the world today, how do you see it unfolding in how you see the events of the world today? Because it's a very dramatic time.
It is a very dramatic time. And so you're talking about which dimension of the world? This planet here, or?
Yes, the world of human beings in the story.
The world of human beings, so whole of humanity. Yeah, that's the usual frame of reference I like to think about, or I like to think about. It's quite challenging to think about it and to feel into it. So if the dimension of the world you're talking about is the whole planet, then the question is, the other question we need to clarify before I can answer that is the chicken and egg question. Yeah, so is there a world out there with pre-given properties? Yeah, is there a material world out there? That's the usual convention. And like 80% of the population would say, yes, of course. Yeah, I can bump my head against the door, so it's there. And that's one side of how I see things working. And the other side is you can also see the whole world as everything as a projection of the cognitive system of the observer, of us humans.
Right.
Yeah. And if we play with both of these at the same time, then we can say, okay, from the event perspective, that this world, this planet is in a disastrous state. And I've just talked to a friend who organized a conference for 900 people on sustainability, and she came back crying, and she said, we have passed the threshold of possible repair in so many areas. Okay? So it's probably inevitable that we will enter a state of upheaval and crisis of we don't know what, because we're just not, we as a species, we didn't understand, for instance, obviously, that on a finite planet we cannot have infinite growth. So resources and climate and social order and financial system, everything is not sustainable this way. On the other hand, that's the event perspective. On the other hand, this, how should I say this? When our organisms and our environment are really a mutual dance, yeah, when this world also is a projection of us observers, then our state of mind is very important in what's going on. So if you ask me, I would say what we are experiencing in the so-called world out there on this planet is a clear reflection of our collective state of mind, or of the distribution of our range of consciousness in the overall population. Yeah? And that comes back to what I said before. 80% of people are in conventional thinking and sense making, which means they are developmentally, they are not in a place to really be compassionate, for instance, really be connected in the way, yeah, once you're connected to really not the concept. The concept is easy. Many people have the concepts. Yeah? But then when you walk through the woods, there's still a number of people who throw away their cans. Yeah? For some people, it's easy for people to have a concept like of connectedness. But it's another story to really display a behavior that is ongoingly stirred by, for instance, a consciousness of connection. Yeah? If we look at humanity as being an organism, if we look at us all being one orchestra, or like Bruce Lipton is, I like Bruce Lipton. He says, what does he say? He says this, we're all cells in a bigger organism or something like that. Yeah? However you put it, once you reach that range of awareness that includes humanity as a whole, yeah, and ask questions like you ask, for instance, yeah, and it's not just a concept but a felt experience, certain things are not possible anymore. Like doing something for your own benefit that harms other people. And that's where I hope we're going to move, because basically we're at a crossroads. Yeah? It's evolution or extinction. And I hope that we will move in a direction of evolution of collective consciousness, because I think we're at a threshold, at a crossroads, evolution or extinction. And
so I when someone says I hope something, I wonder, is that still in a state? I've come to the point where I accept everything in a certain way, and I trust that really I have no control.
Absolutely.
But the one thing that I do have is the focus of my direction.
Yes.
And the focus of my direction is not wholly selfish. Although it's self-oriented, it feels, for me, there's two things going on with our talking. Mm-hmm. We're having a conversation that I plan to share with people, but there's also, I feel like we're meeting at another plane. We're making that connection. And this is why I try to contact people who I feel something for. Mm-hmm. Because I feel that at another level, I'm trying to help build those connections in the astral realm, or whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
And by making it concrete, is it okay? Because I know.
Yeah.
Okay. So by making it concrete and having a face-to-face, I feel it's bringing the attentions closer together.
Absolutely, I agree.
And like I've never felt better in my life than right now, and I see around me the world is going in all sorts of directions. So I can't help but feel they are linked. Now, I can't explain why some people are going this way and some people are going that way, but I do see that the intensity level is powerful. And if you're on a certain end of that intensity level, it seems to have its matching partner going the opposite direction. So I wonder if that is that the nature of consciousness and reality, that there must always be these balanced forces. So in other words, does there have to be insanity?
Yeah, I get you. It's and that's one way to look at it. I don't know. Yeah, we don't live long enough to find that out. But like right now, this backlash can also be explained in a different way. Yeah, I mean there's some people moving forward on this developmental ladder, and some people seem to move backwards, quote unquote. So I can understand where you come from in that. I don't think that this is a written law. Yeah, I rather see it as a dance where each of us gets certain opportunities to realize and to liberate and to wake up, if you want. And some people do more homework. Yeah, I do believe we have no control, bottom line. Yeah, we are flying with 400,000 kilometers an hour through the space right now. Yeah? So it's always relative. But at the same time, we have options and we have responsibility. And we can choose whether or not we take these options. For instance, to develop ourselves, quote unquote, to take the challenges that we're facing. And it seems to me that some people tend to avoid these challenges and rather go back, quote unquote, to where they were, or remain at their stage of development. And some people actively search to progress in some way. And I don't have the whole picture. There is some truth, at least. For instance, I mentioned Susanne Krug-Kreider before. Yeah, she researches these stages of development, and she has done this for decades. And she finds that there is no change overall in society as to the center of gravity of this distribution of consciousness. Yeah, so overall humanity remains at the same level of consciousness. If you look at a certain bubble, there people evolve. Yeah, but on the other side, there are other bubbles where people seem to go like more backwards. Yeah, and in certain big countries, vote for certain big presidents.
I interview a lot of different perspectives, a lot of people with different perspectives, and it seems like these days there are a lot of people getting interesting downloads. And one of the perspectives that I spoke with a fellow, he was saying that for the small percentage of what you might say of awake people, there needs to be that density maintaining the world that isn't necessarily evolving their awareness. She presents an interesting perspective on all this, and there's so much information, it seems, bubbling up to the surface these days.
Yeah. We don't know. I mean, in terms of these stages, we need all these stages, like, for instance, for society to function, for an organization to function. You need the socialized mind people to be in service-oriented professions, for instance. You need the experts to know how things work and take care that things work properly, and so on. There's a function for each of these stages in an overall community or society. So that maybe we just live in a so-called salvation fantasy or in an illusion of progress here. We don't know.
So how about you personally? You obviously have a dedication towards bringing people into awareness as much as you are able.
Yes.
But in a personal sense, do you have a goal, for lack of a better word, or a purpose outside of all of that?
You mean like a life goal or something?
I mean like a purpose for your consciousness. A goal for your consciousness.
The way I see it, consciousness is the purpose. Consciousness is the name of the game, or awareness, or widening the awareness until naturally there's this conscious union and there's this heartfelt compassion and there's this connection with everyone. In my view, it's important to allow for the possibility that it's right here on this plane everything. Yeah, like what you said before, we're also connected on the astral plane. We could map it out this way, yeah? But what does it do to human consciousness? How about we have it here now between us, all of it, all these so-called layers and higher whatever, yeah, all here right now, available for everyone in every moment.
Okay,
Because,
that's sorry, go ahead.
no, it's the one of the things I'm really how do you say in English, digging my teeth into, yeah? Trying to get to terms with, is this separation of the mundane and the spiritual. Yeah? And this concept of these other layers of reality is another beautiful story. But I see so many people getting lost in this spiritual world, while at the same time not having their 2 feet on the ground, not having a functioning life, not having a relationship they want, not working in a way that fulfills, so on. So whatever we can do to spread this notion of it's right here, it's available here, yeah, and there's no all these boundaries like between this world and it's all artificial boundaries, and in the end, when you look into them, they dissolve. So why introduce them in the first place?
So this is actually exactly where I wanted to head to,
okay,
in our exploration together. So let's explore the possibility that what you're suggesting here, that right here. Now, does right here for you mean on the physical plane of the planet Earth, or once we have reached the union of our attentions? Like I'll layer them as attentions. The attention, some people layer them as attentions. The first attention would be, let's say, the realm that we all understand here, the physical planet Earth that we all agree on.
Yes.
The second attention might be that level of awakeness that you kind of sense. There's some people that kind of see what's going on, some people don't. There's a couple of attentions there that are separate from each other, although it's still the same being that is capable of it. And then there's this astral realm. So if we're first suggesting that to unite all these awareness possibilities within the being that we are, which is a multifaceted being, does it transcend what you consider here? Or are you suggesting that it's actually we are still physical beings as we know physical beings? Do you know what I mean? I mean, is this also a transformation and evolution of the Earth itself?
Maybe we'll notice, or maybe it already has transformed for some people. I just find it distracting to put boundaries between these realms, because it makes awakened awareness something special, and it's not. It's our natural state, and is available right here, right now. So if we say there's another realm and some people are aware of it and some people are not, we're classifying people. Yeah? And it's, in my view, it's not useful if we want to spread the news that individually and as a collective consciousness we can be more aware and more aware and more aware, and maybe once share awakened awareness altogether, where we then in the effect we would treat this so-called mundane plane differently, and maybe we would resolve some of the issues that we are facing now.
Well, like you mentioned earlier, isn't that the perspective to not, I can't think of the right word, the perspective that just automatically is not abusive towards life. That is a whole different perspective than the one that basically the world is operating in at this point.
Yes.
Right. So I know what you mean by separation. But it seems to me that separation is kind of real in a way. I mean, like, I get the impression that you would not actively, how do I put this, abuse life. because you're conscious of what that is. And I'm being conscious in your being, not in your mind.
Yes.
That it would just not feel right. It would just
Right.
not feel expansive and that aspect of ourselves can be developed. You must agree. Is
I
that
do
so?
agree, absolutely. That's my work every day.
Oh, sorry.
I absolutely agree.
Okay.
This is my work every day.
Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. I think because I've had this conversation many times with people, and for me, it doesn't feel like separation to notice. And I guess it is separate in a world where we live in separation,
Hmm.
right? This is a world of here and there, and we really trust that that is the correct way, as you were mentioning before. 80% believe live in the certainty that there is separateness.
Hmm.
And that's the
Well put.
paradox, that they're not wrong, but there's also something else going on as well.
Hmm.
I just trying to get an idea of because does it need to be a conscious direction of what's possible, or is it just a matter of doing what you're doing and letting it unfold? And the reason why I'm asking that is because do we need to be conscious enough to direct what's possible, or do we just flow with it? Once you're at the stage of trusting being,
Hmm.
does that make sense what I'm asking?
I think so. um, if we don't do anything consciously, quote unquote, yeah, I mean, let me start differently. I agree that at a certain point in life, what you said before, like saying yes to everything and trusting that whatever unfolds is just the right thing, for me is a natural way to go about things. At the same time, from what I know about how people operate, all the programming that has happened runs its course still, unless you practice dropping away, letting the stories drop away. Yeah? You practice tapping again into the true nature of who you are. From how I see people operate, we all have these programs in us that we pick up in the early stages of our life, and maybe also through the positions of the planets. Yeah? Might be an important fraction of it. And we construct a self-identity from these stories. And there's an agreement, like there's an agreement about this planet and the way we operate on here. There's also an agreement that everybody has a self-identity. And so if you ask people, who are you and what you do, people all have their stories, and they answer with their stories. And that's a very deeply ingrained habit of mind. So I personally don't know of anybody who has been able to live in awakened awareness permanently as a stage without practicing to let certain patterns and certain habits and certain programs and certain stories drop away. You can have an experience, you can have a state, a momentarily state. You can have a big experience without doing anything. And probably most everybody has that. And small children have that. It has nothing to do with the level of development. But to be able to live from that place where your small self and separate self illusion drops away, and you can be connected here, now, with everything, in my experience, it needs practice. And it needs a lot of practice, and it needs a lot of awareness to not think you have found it and then lose it and not notice it.
So with that cognition, what is possible. And what I mean by that is how much of the creator are we, and how much of creators are we? Does there need to be, for those people that have reached that state of practice and training, does there need to be an agreement? Not need to be, but can there be an agreement that reshapes reality?
If there are enough people in that state and stage, right. I would think so. We'll have some way to go to make this experiment. Yeah? But I mean, you've probably heard about this Buddhist masters, for instance. Yeah? There are people on the planet who can walk through walls and who can dissolve their body into rainbow body and then back into the physical form. That's what we're capable of. So, and these people don't do that to show off or to, this is not the goal of the journey, but they do this for teaching purposes. They call it special feats that you can display so that you can create and build up trust in people that this kind of evolution is possible. But I haven't seen it personally, but I know a person very well that has 100% trust, who has seen that with his own eyes. Somebody going to rainbow body and then coming back in the course of teaching a method of meditation. So, given that that's possible, it tells us how much we can be creators. And I see this whole arc as coming from a child's position where you're more in the state of being programmed, to moving on more and more into more and more possibilities of rewriting the program. First your own, and then the more free you are of your own sense of self as the center of attention, the more the awakened awareness becomes non-local and timeless. The more it's something that just flows out the heart in service of all living beings. I don't know what's possible. I'm not there yet personally. I know some people who can do nice things and are very helpful. And that gives me hope. And that gives me this, what you mentioned half an hour ago. That's the story I tell myself. I construct a story for my own life that still keeps up some kind of possibility for progress.
Right.
Because that's how I like to construct my reality. That's what I like to do in my life. And I see it as a choice. I don't see it anymore as something that's programmed into me, but it's something that I choose to tell myself in order to do what I'm doing.
Right. Well, that's what I was getting at when I was asking, when you say about bringing it here. To bring it here needs to be an act of consciousness in the way that you're suggesting. So I was just curious to see what possibility of story you mean by bringing here. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people think of bring here, they picture like paradise. You know what I mean? Like what we've been told paradise looks like.
Yeah.
You know, with a lovely stream and trees and maybe it's something that's all those feelings, but doesn't look like that at all. It's a transcendence of those. I don't know. I have this nature in me that always thinks that we're just always reverting back to an old story, and it needs to be like transcended. But so I'm always curious that it's a hard thing to talk about with someone because it's too vague. But I'm always curious to see where people are going with that little part of their consciousness that really has no rules yet, you know, and where does it play, you know? Anyway.
In one way, paradise is this right now.
Right.
And I hear you talk in a way that, it's an act of consciousness. It's a transcendence of something. In my experience, consciousness is not something you do. Consciousness is all there is on one level. And then all the work is to let stuff fall away and to trust that when things fall away that have been your self-created identity, something else remains. And this something else is a wider and wider field of awareness, where certain things happen naturally. Like, for instance, you don't have to teach anybody compassion once they enter this realm or this stage of development, because it's what happens then in this stage.
It's the natural state.
It is the natural state. Yeah. It is our true nature, yeah, so to speak.
So for you, is integral human design a pathway to that awareness?
Integral human design is more a bridge that we build for people who get reprogrammed and reconditioned by the human design system and get stuck on either some assumptions there about themselves, or get stuck on identifying with aspects there, and so don't move on. So we still create this evaluation so people see a picture similar to what they have seen before, but we use it in a totally different and much wider context. We see it only as this 0.1%. And then there's all the rest of genetics, and then there's all the rest of the unconscious programming, and then there's all the rest of all the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are. And all of this needs to be taken into account. So integral human design is just a map that tries to include as much as possible from what we understand how human beings work. Yeah, it's bringing back the term human design to what it originally means. It means the design of human beings. It means how we operate as human beings. And the term has been captured. So that's what I mentioned some time ago. I find it very important to distinguish between human design, our design as human beings, and the human design system, which is a very particular approach with a very particular calculation that with many ideas, funky ideas, and it's clearly only a story. You can start with the calculation. Yeah? If you look at the calculation, each hexagram has the same length on the circle, but the Earth doesn't move in a circle. The Earth moves in an ellipse. So just from that, it can't be true. But it's a story that has been communicated. Just from that, it can't be true. But it is a story that has been communicated in a way that imprinted people deeply. The way Raoul Hu would hold his lectures, he was in a trance state. He often used drugs in that state when he gave his lectures. And he brought people into a kind of hypnosis. I don't know if he did it consciously, but this information makes a specific imprint on people that's different from other information. And that's why we try to build a bridge and have this nurse identification. You know, sometimes we put on the nurse hat, to say, well, if you have been programmed under the name of deconditioning, human design system tells you it helps you to decondition. In reality, it puts another layer of conditioning on top. So there's more work to do. We only need these evaluations for people who think in these terms and who have identified with these themes there, to help them first. Yeah, I mean, the evolution of integral human design was that first we were just giving out the information like we learned it, and then we included the gene keys of Richard Rudd. And in the moment you include the gene keys, you don't have one body graph, you have three: the shadow and the gift and the city. Yeah, so that opens up a perspective, and it changes the understanding of types. Yeah, because suddenly you have the possibility to look at the type of the human design system in different states. Richard calls it frequencies. Yeah? And then Richard came out with the golden path, and we added that. So we only work with people with the body graph and the golden path to give them this notion of it's not just a fixed image, it's also a journey. And that opened up some space. And really then the important step is to open the context really to what's well described in integral. Yeah? There is type, which means type is what stays the same no matter where you go. And it's a fraction, it's an aspect of who you are. But then there's also stages, and there's states, and there's lines of development, and there's quadrants of apprehension. And you need to see people in all of that, and that introduces the developmental perspective. And then if you hold these evaluations lightly at the side and you work with people, sometimes you have a theme that shows up that is well described there. And in this dance, it can be helpful on any stage, in any moment. And that's also how I started to use it. I didn't focus on giving readings to people in the first place. Rather, I would ask my clients of all kinds of work if they would be willing to share their birth information with me, and I worked with them, and I had the body graph at the side. Yeah, and I always looked what's coming up, what's important to them, what issues do they tackle, and then does it show in the body graph? And it gave me a completely different perspective on what's going on there.
Right.
And it showed me all the variety of how these things can play out.
Yeah, you synthesize a lot of different interesting pieces of knowledge to form your yeah, that's awesome. That's great. You maintain your practice? Do you travel and do seminars around the world?
No, I don't anymore. I did that for a while, and it was very strenuous after a while. I used to work in different countries in Europe, and it's a choice of how do you want to live your life. I find it strenuous to have a practice and then go somewhere, run a weekend, and then come back. It's just you don't have a life anymore. So these days I go slow. I'm 59 in December, so I'm giving myself more space. But let's see what comes up. I have requests now of all sorts of kind, and let's see what comes up.
How do you see it all evolving in those terms? Do you see more of a momentum behind it all, or is it pretty much consistent? Well, the interest and the direction of attention in your way.
The direction of my attention?
No, the direction of people's attentions towards you. As you embody your knowledge, I imagine you create your own gravity. Do you have a sense of things being directed toward you? Is there a progression?
The people who contact me change. When I change, different people come. And generally, I'm not doing anything to make this bigger in any way because of my preference in how I live my life. I want to have a life. I want to take good care of myself. I want to take care of my relationship with my beautiful wife and my kids and my family. So I'm playing it low because otherwise I can work like I worked 15 years ago and it wasn't healthy. My first responsibility in working with people is to take good care of myself so I can work with people who don't and help them along the way. Yeah, there's this saying: if you look for a psychotherapist and he doesn't look healthy, don't work with him. And I think that's a great advice. Yeah. So I do my exercises, I do my practice, I take care of my body, and I want to have some free time, and for the rest I'm available for people to work with me on whatever comes up by now. After.
And what are your practices?
Sorry? What are my practices?
Yeah.
I have physical practices and I have meditation practices. I do exercises, I do yoga, I do some running in low speed for coordinating heartbeat and respiration, heart rate variability kind of oriented training, and I do a meditation practice, Indo-Tibetan Buddhism, which helps me a lot to understand the true nature of mind and to find my way into it.
Do you still ever struggle with conflict, outer conflict with people? I mean, you ever driving your car and you get a little uptight about somebody cutting you off? Do you ever?
Of course, I'm a normal human being. That's what I said before about the stages. Yeah, all these stages live within me and within everybody. It's just a question: how much do you go forward? How much can you include? This is the mantra of the integral people. Yeah, you transcend and include. You transcend and include. You transcend and so it's a layer thing. I can get mad at somebody, of course. I can have a fight with my wife. It doesn't happen very often, and it happens in a totally different way than it used to happen 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But all of these stages, yeah, I have this self-centric survival mode. I have it in me. Of course. As long as I'm in this body, it's going to be here. And it's
so okay. How do you approach that? How do you, when that moment comes, do you notice it right away? I mean, and what do you do? What do you do to unravel that weave?
When my body goes into fight and flight survival mode? Mm-hmm. Well, the main thing for myself is to regulate my autonomous nervous system, which is most accessible for me with breathing and with really grounding my body. And in contact with people, the main thing is to look for safety, to look for that we are both safe again in a conversation, because if something is triggered, then usually both people don't feel secure anymore. And what is it that made me insecure in this moment? And how can I take care of that? Or what can I ask you that would make me feel more secure? So, and then we can continue to talk, not from the brainstem and from the limbic system, but again from the neocortex as two adult people negotiating something or finding a solution or whatever it is.
So how do you notice that moment? Do you notice that moment in your thoughts or in the twisting of the stomach? You both? How do you recognize it?
When survival mode is triggered?
When you feel that sudden tension, that default tension that wants the trigger.
It's all sorts of sensations in the body. Yes, it's in the stomach. It's in the change of breathing. It's in the way that the thoughts go. Yeah, when there's more of a tunnel vision, I know, oops, something is happening. For instance, there's many signs in my system that I can notice. Yeah, or just an emotional response of some kind, anger coming up, fear coming up, pain coming up. And it's not the same every time. It depends on the issue.
So when you're dealing with yourself or with the client, and you're talking about those moments where you're triggered, and you try to pinpoint that, do you try to pinpoint that moment and unravel what happened with the person? Or do you? How do you approach that moment in your practice?
When it happens,
for the other person describing their experiences.
That's too general of a question for me. It really depends on the person and the situation and the issue. And most easily we can work with this in couple therapy, because there often you have this situation live in the office. And then you can really do something about it. Yeah? In individual work, mostly people don't have it right here in front of my eyes. Yeah? So we talk about something which is more difficult to work with.
Right.
But if something happens in the session, I would go in and ask and see what we can, how, for instance, concretely this person can stabilize their autonomous nervous system. For instance, if somebody has a kind of a panic attack, I immediately see the change in the breathing, and just when you monitor the breathing in a different way, often it's away, goes away immediately, and then you check what were the thoughts, what's the story, what's the history behind it. And does this answer your question?
Yes, because I'm very curious about that. I've always been curious about the moment where things go awry, where like in my dealings, I've had a few interviews with human design people where I've said something and they all of a sudden get angry with me.
Wow.
And that happens in my life. I'm one of those people that, because I'm so curious, that my question seems like I'm probing with a purpose. I'm just probing because I'm curious.
Yes,
so I
like that.
I get these dramatic responses to me sometimes, but I always want to unravel that moment so that we can understand what happened. Yeah. But I find a lot of people don't know the moment happened. Yes. So I'm curious how you, in a couples therapy, when it's obvious to you that something has been triggered and they're just reacting from a default mechanism and they're not necessarily conscious of that, how do you pinpoint that and make them go back there? And
I just point it out. I point out whatever, the tone of voice, the words used, the body posture, whatever, where you can see, something is different now. Right. I just grab it there and confront the person with what they're doing or saying right now, and then we can go from there. And it's for some people it's really difficult.
Sorry.
For some people, it's really difficult to be aware of these processes, and part of therapy or working with them is to help them more and more into this competency. So sometimes you point it out and the person says, I wasn't aware of that. So then the work is, how can you be more aware of that? How can you notice it earlier? Some couples fight for 15 minutes before somebody says, I think we're in a fight. And some people do it for 5 days, and some people do it then eventually for 3 seconds, and then somebody says, I think we should change the mode of conversation right now. And that's one sign of progress in that respect. And as you mentioned, human design people, if you look at the overall distribution of what kind of consciousness makes people human design analysts, most of them are experts. Most of them are in this middle realm of conventional thinking, where they're happy to have found their truth, and there's only this one truth. And when you confront this truth or question it even, they can't take it, because it threatens the story they tell themselves about who they are, what their work is, and how the world works.
Yeah, I found that as well. With some,
of course. Yeah, sure. That's the center of gravity. There are other people too. And Richard Rudd is a good friend of mine, and he's an example of somebody completely different.
Yeah. It was a very enjoyable. It's the same with talking with you. I really appreciate people where there's just flow, and there's no sudden doors close on me, and even if it's not an agreement. I mean, I don't mind disagreement. I enjoy anything. It's when that other thing comes back at me. It's like
Yeah, then you know that you talk to somebody in some kind of conventional state of mind. Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just where people are. But this ability for Inspired Dynamics, they call it a flex flow. This ability to go with the movement and take up what's coming, and so that's post-conventional.
So what do you call that cognition, that consciousness that does notice? How do you understand what area of consciousness that is in a being?
That's not a point in time. You notice more and more and more.
Oh.
That's not a point in time where suddenly you notice, but it's a process where you become more and more aware. Yeah. And like in the beginning of our development as humans, we have to focus and pay attention more to external things. We have to learn certain skills. A lot of what's happening in our lives is outside, and there's knowledge to acquire, and there's skills to acquire, and there's tools to learn how to use, and so on. So there is less attention for the inner world, and eventually that starts more and more. And then again, for some people it's going more into the inside of their mind, and for some people it's going more into the inside of their body, and for some people, or at an even later stage, it's all about integration. Yeah, it needs to be everything. Like in integral life practice, you have this, you take care of all the aspects, because all of that is you and all of that is important.
So would you call that the observer and the observed? Or do you not separate it like that?
Would I call what the observer and observed?
Well, the aspect of a person that is reactive and unaware, and that's the mode of being in the world. And you can go through a whole life like, for the most part, and the part where actually can step back and see that you're being this person. How do you understand the separateness of our consciousness in that way?
It's not separate. It's just making a progression. You can describe development as something where something is subject. You are this. Like in the early stages, you are the emotion. You are the experience, and then eventually this becomes object of your mind. You can look at it. Yeah. Or you have this progression from first person perspective to second person perspective. There's me and my needs, and then there's you too and your needs. Yeah? And then there is the third person perspective that can look at that. And then it goes on. There's a fourth person perspective that can look at that in a bigger time frame, and then there's a fifth person. Yeah. So the observer has also different stages it goes through. And eventually there is something like a witness consciousness of the fifth person perspective taken, and eventually all of that collapses back into unity. Yeah, so there are different qualities to that process. It all starts with the human brain being able to self-reflect and to produce beta waves that allow this awake state of mind where you can operate in the way we would say adult thinking works, but that's only the starting point.
Are you okay?
Absolutely.
Energy-wise, are you? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I just got into human design maybe about 5-6 months ago, and it didn't really tell me anything new about myself, but it put it into an order that was useful for me. Mm-hmm. I think I see its limitations, but it explained some things about myself which I didn't quite understand. For instance, my speech. I have a difficult time sometimes linearizing my thoughts into speech. Also, the types. My brother is a projector, and he's a very, very much a projector in how they describe it. But I always had some weird judgment of him in the back of my mind that he was lazy and self-absorbed. Yeah. And without even knowing it. But it did free me up to just let everybody be in some way, which I thought I was already that person. Yeah. The system has given me a lot of information that's been quite useful for me. Mm-hmm. Now, I guess the one thing that I do notice in my mind, and I guess everybody's mind is the same, is that it wants to look at a piece of paper and say, "Hey, that's me." Mm-hmm. And then it's limited to that flat piece of paper and that little diagram. Yeah. I do feel that impulse in my mind to want to have everything as a flat answer. Yeah. I guess where I was going with this is that I do notice that I have some things that impact my relations with people. For instance, when we're talking, I can all of a sudden just lose the thread in a second. Mm-hmm. And yet I'm deeply immersed in it, but my mind can just go off. Yeah. Do you find that our natural tendencies are something that we must flow into them, or do we need to not counteract them, but
doing something about them?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Do you just go with them, or do you learn what you need to do to counteract that? Do you practice memory tricks?
That's your choice.
Right.
I see a lot with people who get in touch with the human design system that, first of all, the information they receive makes sense to them because it's part of their humanity. And because there is some specific descriptions that correspond to life experience. And that's also why we still keep working with that in some way. Because if it would be all crap, we would have dropped it. But there's something to it. What I also notice is once people have this information, many tend to then use it as an excuse. To say, okay, this is how like a projector. Yeah. I have a close friend who is a projector, and she always was happy with this description of, okay, you're a non-energy being, one of the words I really think is so destructive for projectors when they identify with that. So I can be lazy and I have to wait and I can be passive and and then eventually there was a kind of measurement with this heart rate variability measurements where it came out that her energy is just high up, much higher than of other people. And that she needed to run every day for 30 minutes to use the energy because otherwise it would get stagnant and she would feel at unease in her body and in her mind and have emotions and drama and all sorts of stuff. Yeah? If you ask a human design person, they would say that's wrong for you. Yeah? People are so different. And if you have only this one lens, then you can explain some behaviors and some traits, and then you can identify with them, and then you lose this question maybe. Yeah. So you are a person who is aware of that process and now ask this question: do I live with it or do I change it? Great, you have this option. Great, you ask this question, because that's, for me, is a mature way to go about these things. To say, okay, I'm losing the thread. It's fine with me. Yeah. Or do I establish a kind of practice that enables me to have a different skill here? But the thing is, because these informations from the human design system attach to in a different way in people's mind, I often observe that it's difficult for them then to question it, more difficult than with other kinds of program. It's like a tattoo that you get. Yeah? This body graph, it has the effect of a tattoo, and you have it then on your body and you identify with it, and you can remove it, but it's hard work. People who have learned this lingo, you can remove it, but it's hard work. Like with a tattoo, it's painful. It's possible, but it's painful. It takes a lot of time. And this imprint the human design information makes in a person, because they immediately connected with certain traits and say, okay, this is me. And then comes this other layer, I'm supposed to be this way. I'm born to be this way. Yeah? And suddenly you're in the acceptance of being run by a program that is only a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the program that runs you. And you focus on that. And you lose the overall picture of what actually is the issue. What really is the issue in life that you want to tackle and where you want to change something maybe that really makes a difference. So you can live more and be more fulfilled and love more and make more of a difference.
Right. Yeah, that's the interesting dichotomy I had with speaking with human design people, is that, you know, as a generator, I'm to respond according to them. And I shouldn't, because I have an undefined throat, I shouldn't speak first. But there's a practice called not doing that I practice, where I challenge myself to do things that go against my nature totally, because what it does is that it tweaks my consciousness.
Super.
But if I did it unconsciously, I would be affected by the response I would get. But by doing it consciously, it's more like playing with the field.
Yes.
And playing with my field.
If you just listen to how you said that just now, it's so interesting. Suddenly you use a language that says, they say I should. They say I should respond only. Yeah, and this is the usual way these things happen. Suddenly you are in the programmed role. Yeah? And you accept, you go back into a group-centric stage of awareness, where suddenly their norms become your norms. And you use completely different language when you talk about it now. Did you notice?
Right. No, I didn't.
And that's a live example of what I see happening. Because that's the expert knowledge that's transferred, and it's not only coming from the expert of the analyst, but there's a whole hierarchy of experts. Yeah, and the highest in that is the voice that Ra had this information from, and then there's Ra, the messenger, and then there's the analyst who, he's the expert who now tells you how you function, how you're supposed to function in this vehicle. Woo, and there you go. I should be like this. This is who I really am. And there is the big danger in that.
Right.
Because it closes doors. And to refer back to the beginning, if the world out there is a reflection of our collective state of mind, we need to see what determines our state of mind. And then the human design system has an effect that's in alignment with all the other programming that we get through media, and that is keeping us small, keeping us dependent on the right track that other people point out to us and all this stuff. And that's why we created Integral Human Design, because there's a different way to use this information if you yourself step into a different place, but also if you don't see it as a description of who you are. You said that before. Yeah? You look at this body graph and it's made in a way, consciously or unconsciously, I don't know, but it's made in a way that it triggers identification. The body graph has an effect that it triggers strong identification. It's a small time that elapses between, this is an evaluation drawn from my time of birth that gives me some information about some sticky dots of my consciousness in my flesh. That is 0.1% of my program, maybe, if you want to look at it like that. From there to, like you said, this is me. And forgetting everything, that this isn't only a typology drawn from a very small, it's a typology of how you uphold differentiation. There's so much reductionism here. Differentiation is not the name of the game. Differentiation is a stepping stone on the way. For everybody who is like in the development before differentiation, that's helpful in some way. For people who already have differentiated, for them it's not helpful at all. So you go from, interesting, funky information, to, this is me, to, this is how I should be, and strategy. The system tells you a strategy how you should lead your life. Wow, that's dangerous.
What, in your view, determines our collective state of mind? What force is that? Is it a force?
I don't know. I have no idea. I just see that it is a sum total of so-called individual awarenesses that in the end is one field, and that we can liberate ourselves from certain kind of programming, including human design system programming, so that more of this can shift. But who determines that? And whether there is forces that, I don't know, like you said in the beginning, make sure that when some people move to later stages, that other people have to go back to earlier stages. I don't know how this works. This is beyond the realm of my comprehension. I don't believe in any higher force because of my experience of the field of awareness. For me, it's very tangible when I open myself up that on one level it's a reality that we are all one. So I don't need any story of some other force or higher force making this happen. Overall, I don't know, all of this seems to be entertainment for consciousness itself. Yeah? Consciousness looks at itself and creates all these lively expressions, and I don't know. But I'm happy to not know.
Does consciousness need to be challenged in your view? Is that why there's death even for this awareness? Is that if there's not a pressure against us that we won't, that consciousness won't find a way?
Does consciousness need to be challenged?
Yes. In other words, it seems like this is a world that we are born into, this world of challenge and conflict, inner conflict, outer conflict, tension or friction. It seems like even in personal trauma will lead to an awakening often. Is it an innate aspect of consciousness in this form that it needs to be challenged and presented with limitations in order to? Do you think that that's part of the ultimate program?
It seems to be part of the game. That everything we experience is an opportunity to open up. Yeah, either we open up and love more, or we contract and close. That's always the option. And if we experience whatever we experience and we use it for awareness to expand and to include, then this process happens. But I don't think we can do something about consciousness or with consciousness, because we are consciousness from a mind perspective. That's all we are. And we have a form body that in my view is something like an antenna for consciousness. Yeah. So we are this interplay between form and consciousness. And that's one of the interesting things in the human design system, calculation, yeah? that it suggests a very interesting way of how consciousness is maybe twisted into the flesh. Yeah? These are the aspects where I would like to, without all the lingo and all the ideas of how you're born to be. Yeah? This is an interesting input that maybe, without all the lingo, this is an interesting part of this knowledge that's maybe worth exploring. Because nobody knows how consciousness works. Yeah? We know so much about the human brain, but we also know that we don't understand consciousness at all. Maybe because we are it. Yeah. But this idea of consciousness is somehow, twisted into the form body, and there's a way there's a certain way how this happens, and from there are certain sticky dots or seams that remain from this process, that then can be calculated. That's an interesting idea. I'm still playing with it.
Yeah, for me, that's the most interesting aspect of human design as well. And even the fact that in astrological terms, the 88 degrees from the design crystal to the personality crystal is a square in astrology. And a square is the aspect of tension. Mm-hmm. So it seems we are born in tension. And it seems to... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, friction. I know what you mean, and tension in terms of... It's a square in astrology because it's close to 90 degrees. Right. But this 2 degrees difference is this little asymmetry or this little lag that needs to be there for this illusion of time and unfoldment to occur. But I don't think we're born in tension, and we're born, like you said before, this is part of the programming. We're kept in fear, and we're fed with all sorts of information that make us believe we're competitive animals, but we're not. If you really look at the brain, how we operate, when the gratification system of the brain sets in, It's all about being creative, cooperative, loving animals, quote unquote. Yeah? If we do that, we get all the good chemicals that make us feel terrific. Yeah? We're not built to fight and to compete and to be under stress and to be in tension. No, not at all. It's part of the story we are told.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think we pretty much covered a lot there.
We did. And it
I
was a
appreciate
pleasure
it
to
very
talk
much.
to you.
I got so much out of talking with you. I appreciate you taking the time with me.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this project and
Awesome.
contributing to more variety and more perspectives for expanding consciousness.
Well, for me, it's about connecting the dots too, and I love that we got a chance to connect.
Like, thank you for your great questions, and thank you for this contact. Enjoy your Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you.